Two little mice fell into a bucket of cream. The first mouse quickly gave up and drowned, but the second mouse, he struggled so hard that he eventually churned that cream into butter. And he walked out. Amen.
Welcome to Successful Dropout. This podcast is for the outliers, the innovators, the rebels, those that dare to dream and act on their dreams. I'm your host, Kylan Ginger. Join me as we find out what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. What's up, fam squad? I've got some pretty exciting news. If you listen to the podcast much, you know we've been building a pretty vibrant community of truly extraordinary people who have committed to an unconventional route through life. The Successful Dropout audience has been growing a lot, and I get a lot of people reaching out to me now with all sorts of questions regarding education, dropping out, opting out, entrepreneurship, resources, networking, etc. So much so that I decided it was time to create a more accessible community on Facebook so that we can all ask and answer these kinds of questions together, as well as celebrate our successes and encourage each other during inevitable adversity. So I've created a closed Facebook group, and I want to invite you to join it. If you follow Successful Dropout, if you resonate with our philosophy and want to help me grow this thriving community, go to successfulDropout.com/group. This community is for the rebels, the outliers, the innovators, the doers, and those who dare to dream and act on their dreams. If you're a dropout, an opt-out, if you're thinking about doing one of those things, if you're a parent, even if you aren't any of those things and you graduated school, I want to invite you to join. All that matters is that you resonate with the Successful Dropout philosophy and that you enter the group with the intention to provide value to the other members and not just receive value yourself. Again, go to successfuldropout.com/group to request admission. Once you're a part of the group, introduce yourself and get involved, and I'll see you there. What is up, Successful Dropouts? Get stoked because today on the show we have Cathal Berragan. I think I pronounced that right, too. It's another person that has a very unique name along with myself. But at 19 years old, he dropped out of university in the UK to join a small team of 4 in Manchester to start building a social media marketing agency called Social Chain. In the first year, the team grew to around 30 staff, and he worked as the head of campaigns, overseeing the execution of all client work. Since then, Social Chain has worked with brands such as Puma, Malibu, Comedy Central, BBC, and Universal. Those are some big names. 2016 saw Social Chain's expansion to Berlin and even New York, and their staff has grown to around 60 now. Cathal has he has been recognized by Tech Insider as one of their 50 most influential people on social media. So, Cathal, that's the intro I have for you, and I still hope I'm saying your name correctly, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
You're nailing it.
Tell us more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I think, you're nailing the name. That's not a problem at all. No, that's perfect. I think following on from that, I'm now based in New York. As you mentioned, the team has expanded over to Berlin, which was our first kind of port of call, and then we the next real target for us was America. And I think anyone that starts in the marketing industry and the social industry itself, America's kind of where you really want to establish yourself. And so I moved here last summer to kind of launch the US operations and explore it as our potential biggest market. And so now here I am. And
so when we were first talking here, I know it's kind of cliche, but I think our listeners would enjoy it. You were talking about, or I asked you about your accent and if, that was helping you get along well here in America, and you were saying that it was coming in handy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not something you think about when you live your whole life surrounded by people who speak the same, and all of a sudden it's suddenly very interesting to people. But honestly, it's just a conversation point, and I think, especially in a place like New York, if you can get people, who are willing to talk to you for 5 minutes, you just never know who you're going to meet. And having that English accent, they usually want to know what you're doing here. And absolutely, if anyone else has that experience where they move over to America with an English accent, don't be afraid to milk it.
Seriously,
as
I
much as you
bet
can.
that's like a really great icebreaker. I wonder do you think if
Absolutely.
I went over to Europe with my like American accent, does it have the same effect or no?
I think it does. I think it depends where you go. Absolutely. I mean, you'll have to give it a go when you head there.
Yeah.
But the thing with it, problem with the UK is that we've all grown up, watching Friends and consuming so much American media that we're almost a bit more used to it, I think.
That's kind of interesting to me, actually, that you mentioned that. And you're in media, basically, so you might have something to speak to that. But, like, why... I have heard that, like in Europe, like you tend to consume a lot more American media than I feel like we do of your media, and I wonder why that is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know whether it's just because English humor is quite unique and it's quite niche and it's not very well, whereas I think American humor is more broad and almost a little more slapstick, so it can be enjoyed pretty much anywhere. But yeah, I know if I ever speak to a European person who's not from England, whose second language is English, they'll always have a slight American accent because they learn their language. They learn English by watching American TV, like Friends,
Right.
and How I Met Your Mother.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. I've never really understood that, but
Yeah.
Disney Channel I grew up with, as well as like Nickelodeon.
That is really interesting. Do you watch or are familiar with Monty Python at all?
Of course, yeah.
Like, I mean, that's like some of the English humor that, like,
Yeah,
I can
it does,
really
yeah.
get into the slapstick stuff. I find it hilarious. A lot of my friends don't, but oh my gosh, I laugh so hard at anything they put out.
Fantastic.
Okay,
yeah, I think some shows have made it. Go on, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm wondering, let's start. Tell us kind of your story. 19 years old, you decided to drop out of University of UK. Which, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it you that kind of told me that was more of a like an Ivy? It'd be considered more of an Ivy League.
Yeah. So we in the UK we call it Russell Group, which is or Red Brick, which is the same thing essentially. It's the kind of the league of universities that everyone really aims for.
Gotcha.
But I think obviously it depends what course you do, and these things are just usually for status, which I'm not a huge fan of. But it just means that it's much more difficult to justify to other people leaving, as you can imagine.
And so, what was it that made you leave then? I mean, did you drop out and then kind of discover the social chain or
So I think what it's worth doing is taking it back like a few more years.
Yeah, let's do
because
it.
I've when I was sort of in my early teens, even when I was like 13, 14, I like fell in love with the idea of the internet. It became like a very because it was around that we were kind of the generation that really grew up with it. And I started exploring it, and social media only really dropped. It was only really YouTube and like Facebook was new and Twitter was new. When I actually started on YouTube, I started making YouTube videos, which I don't want to talk too much about because they're actually still up there. I refuse, as a homage to my 13-year-old self, I don't want to ever delete them because I feel like he'd be annoyed at me. So they are still there as a sort of a placeholder for my younger ambitions. But I became obsessed with the idea that you could like put content online and then receive feedback from someone 1,000 miles away.
Right.
It just was so cool to me. So that's what I did. I used to make YouTube videos to begin with, which was fine. I got a few hundred views, nothing massive. I would then experiment. I used to take photos and put them on Flickr. I used to contribute on Reddit. I became really engrossed with this idea of conversing online and creating content online. But then obviously school took over and that became a priority, and I discovered that you could actually socialize off the computer and I spent a little more time enjoying myself. But then Twitter came along, and that was I think if we look at around 2008, 2009, I discovered Twitter, and I actually made a account during so we call it GCSEs, which I believe is, I'm trying to think of the American equivalent, but it's the exams you do when you're around 15, 16.
Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, it was the exam season, and I was like anyone, stressing and revising and not really enjoying it. And so I created a page on Twitter called Exam Problems. And I started posting these funny jokes and little things that it was part curation, but part me coming up with these own like silly jokes about people that were revising for exams. And in the UK, everyone does the same exams at the same time. So you got this kind of, for example, on one Monday morning, the whole country would be doing a chemistry exam. So I know that I could post a joke about that exact exam and reference a question, and the five or 6,000 people would retweet it because they were all it really struck a chord with them.
Wow.
So this account, like this, it blew up in my head. It gained around 20,000 followers in around 3 weeks, which doesn't sound massive now, but it was the first time that I'd seen real kind of viral reaction to stuff that I'd put out on the internet. And this really began to snowball. I think it was around 50,000 followers within like a month, 2 months, and which was really interesting. And it was being picked up by the UK media. It was appearing in a few publications like the Daily Mail and the Sun were writing about how kids were going to Twitter after their exams to vent their frustrations. And it was a bit of fun at the end of the day. But I received a message during this time from a guy called Stephen Bartlett, who would, as you may know, go on to found Social Chain. And he initially he wanted to talk about ways that he could partner on his first business, which was a student social network called Wallpark. And his concept was to use these Twitter pages, which he knew that students were spending time on, to drive people to his website. Mm-hmm. And so I think I received the message. I was around 16 at the time, and he asked me. Luckily, I lived near Manchester, and he was based in Manchester as a student, and he asked me to come meet him. I don't condone meeting people on the internet if they message you on Twitter, by the way, especially if you're 16 years old.
Gosh, yeah.
That took a bit of convincing for my mum to let me hop on the train. But that's what I did, and it turned out to be a really good decision. So we'd agreed to kind of, I'd work with him on pushing out content, which we did for a while. However, I went on to do my sixth form, which is I'm keep trying to do the American equivalents of these schools here. It's a little confusing, but basically, I went on to graduate high school and move on to university while doing this. And I think at this time, I knew in the back of my head that there were two options. It was like, I go to university, or can I explore this world of social media that could potentially have something more in store for me. But when I'm young and impressionable, and I went to a decent school, and you're given one option really, and that's to go to university. Yep. So at 18, that's what I did. So I was around 19. I went to university, a good university that I'd worked very hard to get into. But I think I knew, and I was one of those people that should never really have gone in the first place, and I knew that deep down. But you're not really given that as an alternative at that stage of your life, and I hope that's going to change soon. But especially in the UK, it was never really presented as an option for me to not go to university, especially after working so hard. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, well, I wonder if you mentioned something that kind of deep down you felt like you shouldn't go, but you weren't presented with another option. Why do you think that was? Like, maybe what was it about your parenting or upbringing that gave you that sort of innate feeling?
I don't think it was my upbringing. I think it was the school that I went to, and I think this is true of any school in the UK. And it was a school that very proud of itself and its results, and had a good reputation. And at the end of the day, they give statistics at the end of the year with how many students they place at higher education, and they will say we put 200 students in Russell Group or Ivy League universities, and that's celebrated. So at the end of the day, every single student becomes a statistic to them. So they're not interested in whether it's actually the best for my development. what matters is how many kids at the end of the year is, it's a percentage. 98% of the kids that year went to good universities, and that's all they're interested in doing, is ensuring that criteria is fulfilled. But I knew in my head that there was another way. But I think I was just, and this is something that I learned, I need to be more trusting in my own ability, and I think I have done since then. I should have put my foot down and really said no.
Yeah, and I think that's so key. I literally just got out of another interview where we went really in depth into that concept of, being able to, in these situations where you grow up and society is just, they're trying to push all these things on you, and it's like, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to learn, where you're supposed to go. Being able to trust in yourself and in sort of your innate curiosities, and to pursue those despite the social norms or the status quo, which is what we're all about here at Successful Dropout. It's why we have people like you on the show to encourage those who are listening to maybe trust their gut a little bit more, and if they know they're not supposed to be in school, what else should they be doing, and what are the best steps to take to be able to do that? So it sounds like you already you kind of had that feeling, and then I guess continue on with the story there.
So I think dropping out is difficult, and I think we're not going to pretend that it was like an easy decision for me.
Right.
But I realized pretty quickly that the only thing I was worried about was what my parents thought. But I think if your parents really cared about you, they'd understand that you need to put your happiness before, where they think is good for you to be. And if you are genuinely not happy and you feel suffocated and trapped, at higher education, then I think if you can somehow get that across to them, they will support you, because they know that that's what's most important to you. Because I think, getting them to trust you is the difficult part. I think in this day and age, I can only assume that the people that want to drop out are going to explore a venture that their parents might not understand yet.
Right.
Which is, it was certainly the case for me. I explained to my parents what social chain did and the power we had over social media, and they just, they didn't really know what I meant, or what was meant to be going on. But I convinced them to trust me, and I said that if I was to stay at university for 3 years, I'd be unhappy. And that was it. From that point, they were supportive. I think they knew that was far more important than, me putting my head back down and getting a degree. And if it was the right decision, then great. And if not, then at least I did what I wanted to do. I think what you need to shift the focus from, is this going to make me loads of money, to, is it going to mean that, because it's all about the journey, not the end of the destination. Yeah. And if you can ensure that you're happy during the journey, that's what's most important.
Yep, well said. And so then you ended up at Social Chain at 19.
Yeah, so
right?
I throughout my university, I kept in contact with Steve, and he, throughout my first year, him and his business partner, they exited their first company, which was Wallpark. And he spoke to me, very briefly about he'd sourced all these social media pages, some of which I'd built, and he'd now had companies such as Spotify and Copperberg, which is a brand of cider in the UK, who wanted to post on those pages. And it kind of, there was a bit of a moment there where he realized that there was inherent value in the marketing plan that he built for this other business. So he exited Wallpark, and what I began to do was I used to come home during university for we had reading weeks in the UK, which were weeks that you had off, that you were meant to read, but you meant to read up on your course.
That's like a real thing that everybody does in the UK? Like
yeah.
Reading weeks?
Reading week, it's every single humanities subject. So if you do English, most, I think it's like half the courses. Because I think what a lot of people do is that they spend so much time in lectures and classes that they forget to actually read half the material that they're given. So we have these weeks in every term that meant that we can take them off. But what I used to do is go home to Manchester and work with Social Chain and work with Steve and Dom and the two other people that were there, to start kind of building this network we had. And it was in Easter holidays that I went back, and I just decided that I wasn't going to return to university. That was that. And yeah, it was at that stage I just tell my parents, and I very vividly remember the conversation I had. But I think it was by that I'd made my mind up by then, and I think they worked it out as well.
Right. Great story, man. So Social Chain, can you just, for people that aren't familiar with it, can you tell us about Social Chain, what it is you guys do, maybe some of the stuff you've done, and like what maybe some stuff that we might have seen that originated with you guys that we just may not have known.
Absolutely. So the company was really born from gathering a few of the UK's most sort of prominent Twitter influencers. This is 3 or 4 years ago now, when Twitter was really the dominant platform.
Yeah.
It was really born from gathering these people together and realizing that the value of all these pages combined was much greater than each one individually. And so we knew we could go to brands and say we have this network that really tapped into the UK youth market better than anyone else. And not only that, but we knew that the knowledge we had about how to reach these people was far greater than most of the marketing departments in many of the youth brands at the moment.
Yep.
So we really, that's how it kind of came about. And since then because I think what it's really important not to do is become precious about your product. And our product for the first year or so was Twitter, and we had this huge network on Twitter. But that influence started and that effectiveness started to dwindle slightly. So we started to pivot, and we had these brands on Twitter. For example, we had a page called Student Problems, which had 100,000 followers, and another brand called Sporf, BBC Sporf it was, which was a football or soccer account. And that had around 1 million followers.
Wow.
But as we saw these, and it was working well for us, but we knew that this, we couldn't put all our eggs in this basket. So we started to build brands out of them, and we moved Student Problems onto Facebook and Instagram, and we did the same with Sporf, BBC Sporf. And on Facebook, we saw the craziest growth we've ever seen on Student Problems. It went from, I think we started with around 20,000 followers that we'd driven from Twitter. And then the organic pickup was, I think we were hitting at its height around 150,000 new likes every week. And this page is only a year old. It was last summer that we really put some time and effort into it. And it's now on just over 5 million likes on Facebook.
Good Lord.
Yeah, and it's still growing at 6 figures every single week.
I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah, Student Problems. So and so it went from these, these fun little parody accounts on Twitter, and I think there were a lot of people doing this at the time, but no one really had the vision to turn these into full media brands, which is what we've done now. And the real value, I can imagine you're scrolling through.
Yeah,
some of
that's why I'm chuckling. I'm like, oh, these are funny.
Yeah. And I think what's really valuable here is that Student Problems has become a recognizable name for, students in the UK and in the US. It actually has a larger US audience now than the UK, simply because of, scale.
Mm-hmm.
But people recognize this, everyone, every single friend I know knows Student Problems. So when we do work with a brand, they're getting, that if you can imagine, we host a piece of content on this for a brand. Yeah. They know that we're a trustworthy source, and we're almost on their side, as opposed to we're trying to sell to them. We're trying to make their lives better.
Yeah.
And so since then, I think we've done really well to pivot from just owning these pages to creating a network of media companies that sit all under Social Chain. So that's like a really brief summary of the work Social Chain do. I could go on forever.
No, so are you still the head of campaigns there?
So that's what in the UK that was my role. I led the campaign team, and I all those brands that you mentioned earlier. I would conceptualize and coordinate the campaigns with my team. But in the US, I've got a much more sort of holistic role. You know, when moving out here, it's almost like we went back to the startup level again, which has been really exciting, but almost also extremely challenging, because I end up having to do like I'm doing like finance and recruitment, and so my role covers almost everything now. But I think my first job and what I'm still working quite heavily on is defining our product in the US, because we're very, very well established in the UK, and we've made a good name for ourselves in the media and marketing world. But we need to make sure that, number one, the US know about us, and number two, we have a tangible product to sell.
Right.
So that has meant, meeting with a lot of large, media owners, and also acquiring a lot of large communities as well. And that's going really well, I think, as well. And what's massively helped is that pages such as Student Problems are growing naturally in the US faster than they're actually growing in the UK. So it's just been I think the timing was perfect. And it's just kind of now a case of really introducing ourselves here.
So really quick, the staff that you have that you say is around 60 now, are those mostly other like social media influencers, or are you just continually trying to attract more social media influencers with bigger accounts and then kind of bring them into your branding fold and philosophy?
I'd say it's only around 20 or 30% actually work on the media side of the company. What we managed to do is that we bought these influencers in early, but then from there we could grow our own kind of network, and we worry less now about bringing these people in, because our team's so strong at doing it in the UK. And most of the company, and I think this is what we've done really well with, and I think that's what other media companies lack, is that we have a really strong agency, like a full service creative agency. So we have a studio back in England. We have an amazing design team, a great video team as well, and obviously, of course, a team of salesmen. And so I think we've done really well with not just having the media, but coming up with the creative as well. And I think that's why brands look to us, is that we can produce great content, conceptualize great content, and then have the distribution ourselves. Which I think we developed the agency as quickly as that was as much of a priority as building the media, whereas a lot of media agencies haven't quite caught up with that yet.
Yeah, so you guys have really been able to turn it into a full, basically marketing firm, like a full-scale business instead of just a bunch of influencers with a bunch of followers on different platforms. Yeah, that's what we're all about here, man. I'd be curious for anybody listening. Of course, it's a very attractive idea. Say somebody listening who desires to, because that is kind of it's a very addicting feeling. I mean, even I've just gotten from just launching this podcast, and our audience is growing rapidly. To be able to put stuff out there and have people like respond to it and follow you and listen to you, and like eventually start to really trust you and what you have to say. Like you said earlier, you're on their side. I wonder what you'd have to say to anybody who's listening who is wanting to start some sort of following on some platform. Maybe what tips or advice you'd give them, I guess.
Yeah, I think the most, and I think this is the most important thing, is that you have to build it around something that you're passionate about. Like you can't, I couldn't tomorrow build a page around surfboarding, because I've never surfboarded in my life. But if you think that the people that built, when I built Exam Problems, it's because I like humor, and that's what I was doing right then. and the guy that I think Nick Speakman, who now runs our sports team in the UK, he built this 1 million follower Twitter account because he loves sports, and
Gotcha.
he would be talking about it anyway. So you can't go into this, and none of the people ever went into this with the view of building a business, or with the view of turning over brand deals. We all did it because it was fun, and because we like community, and we like discussing things with other people. And it just so happened that social media has created a platform for us to do that for a living. So I think if you're looking to build an audience, people do respond really well to passion and respond really well to someone who has authority about a subject, and that's only ever going to come because you enjoy that thing or you live that thing. Aside from that, I think there's a million kind of ways of doing it. It's difficult to really sort of give one or two tips of how you can start something like this.
Right. I mean, would you say that the best place though for somebody to start would just to start by building a social media account around something they're passionate about and continue to learn and research and grow from there?
100%. That's how you do it. That's the only way you're going to learn is by failing in the first place. If you think that I used to make YouTube videos when I was 13, for example, and that it became clear to me that wasn't how I was going to build an audience, and these things kind of it's all about trial and error.
Yep.
And you're not going to get it right first time. So
yeah, so like your foray into this massive Twitter following at first, it was not your first kind of experience trying to build a following.
Absolutely.
Basically.
And that wasn't the first Twitter account I made.
Right.
There were other Twitter accounts that we don't need to talk about because they weren't they weren't particularly good and they never did anything. But it's never going to be the first the first venture you try that's gonna take off. It's just, I think, the only reason I've made 2 or 3 Twitter accounts since the first few that failed was because I enjoyed it and because I wanted to do it, not because I thought that one day I was gonna do it for a living or it was gonna turn into a business.
Right. Where do you kind of see yourself going long term, I guess, basically? Do you have kind of a long-term vision for what you want to do? You think you'll be with Social Chain for a while?
Yeah, I think I live very, very much in the present,
right.
Which is good. It's a great thing, but also it's quite difficult to look on much. But it's why I kind of moved to New York at a moment's notice. I don't really think too much, but for me, I think we're at a point right now where the media landscape is shifting, and I think we have these points in history where print started to take over, then it was television. And I think now we're seeing this new, really exciting landscape appear in front of us where there's no, we've always been controlled by 3 or 4 big players. When it was TV networks, whether it was newspapers, it was literally controlled by 3 or 4 people who could, funnel their message into the population. And I think now this is what we're seeing now is this decentralized network of hundreds of communities and hundreds of influencers and audiences here and there all dotted around. And I think this is really where the future of media is going to be for people. And Social Chain are really at the forefront of that. So it's just an incredibly exciting to be right in the thick of it. And a lot of the questions I get are, well, what are you going to do when Twitter dies, or what are you going to do when Facebook dies? But I think it's just much bigger than that. And I think that we have such an agile team that we're always going to be the first people, the first movers in a particular space. And I just can see that in 10 years' time we'll look back and this will be a much larger kind of thing.
Really interesting. And you mentioned earlier that. You said you don't think much. You just kind of keep moving forward. So are you? You must spend like a lot less time thinking and more time doing. I mean, do you have a real bias for action, I guess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 100%. I think that's something we focus on a lot. Is that, like we said earlier, trial and error is everything, and just like I've failed with some Twitter accounts, Social Chain have failed when we've tried to move into some platforms. We were very keen, for example, when Snapchat really burst onto the scene, we thought, right, we have to build huge audiences here. And it's become very clear now that that probably took time that we shouldn't have spent doing that, because Snapchat now, whilst I still think it's a very powerful tool, it's just not built for, large audiences. It's not built for brands, and we don't do any work on there at the moment.
Right.
So, yes, definitely. I think we always said that our mantra is the same. I think Mark Zuckerberg said this was his sort of mantra when he was launching Facebook, was to move fast and break things. And it's something that we pride ourselves on, as long as you learn from what you break.
Yeah. No, I actually really like that. I've never heard that before. I'm writing it down right now.
Yeah.
Move fast and break things. I've always put it in the way that, because I've done a lot of different, stuff myself, and you throw a lot against the wall and you see what sticks. And so I've always put it like, if I'm starting a new venture, say, I try to break it as fast as possible. Almost.
Yeah.
You just try to, you go full steam ahead and find out if it works or not. And sometimes it doesn't, sometimes it does. And that's...
Exactly.
Yeah.
You can't be too precious about either.
Yeah. What would you consider to be one of your worst entrepreneurial moments of your journey so far?
That's a good question. I think personally for me, it was I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. There was a time after leaving, there's that summer when I left, when I just graduated from high school. I just left secondary school. And I had to make the decision when I was going to university or not, and I was just in limbo. I think I was in this complete place where, almost like purgatory, where I just did not know where to go.
Yep.
And I remember that being a particularly difficult time, because I had so many people telling me one thing and so many people telling me another. And that for me was, I think I learned a lot about myself, and I learned that I need to be a little more bold and make decisions a little more quickly, and not let it chew over in my head too much, because it means that you stop working and you stop focusing on one thing, and I remember that being a particularly difficult moment for me.
When you say focus on one thing, I mean, do you typically only focus on one thing? Like, you pick something and this is what I'm going to move forward and break things with? Or, how do you feel about trying to take on kind of multiple ventures at once? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think when I said focus on one thing, I meant more just focus, full stop.
Okay.
But
like
no, I
continuous action sort of thing?
Exactly, yeah.
Gotcha.
And I don't think you have to just focus on one thing. I do, because, that's, Social Chain is 100% what all I care about right now. Mm-hmm. But I know a lot of people who and I think it's really healthy that experiment and don't put all their eggs in one basket, and have a lot going, and it keeps them busy. And what usually happens is that one of them takes over, and they can leave the others behind. And if you can do that, and if you can be efficient, then 100% go for it.
Yeah.
But I it's a difficult one, because a lot of people will say that you have to put everything into one venture, otherwise it's never going to work. But I think everyone's different, and I know a lot of people that have done well from running, juggling 5 or 6 different things, and then one of them has really taken off for them.
Right. Yeah, I think you're probably right. I think that's probably the key, is you just throw a lot against the wall, especially when you're young, for people listening, and
exactly.
Maybe you don't quite know what you should do, or maybe you've got kind of several different options you could take, to keep throwing stuff at the wall, see what sticks, and something will definitely sort of stand out to you as more prominent than the rest, or presenting a little bit more opportunity than the rest. But I think you're right too. On the flip side, I do know some people that have done very well at, they do multiple things, but they do them like one at a time. It's like they'll focus super hard for maybe a year on this, and they'll focus hard for a year on something else. That's an interesting conversation, because then I think if you're doing multiple things at once, though, you do have the ability to see which one kind of stands out from the rest. Whereas if you're just doing one at a time, you might be doing one thing for a couple of years, thinking that it's doing really great, when in reality something else you could have done would be doing 10x what the current thing you're doing is, if that makes sense.
Definitely, yeah. And I think it's not just what stands out as presenting more opportunity, but which one you care about and enjoy more. Because that's probably where you're going to have the most success anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're coming down to the last bit here, and before I let you go, I've got a couple questions that I ask every guest on the show. And the first one is, do you have any parting advice for any of our listeners who are thinking of dropping out to start their entrepreneurial journey, but they haven't quite made that step yet? Any parting advice for them?
I think, let me think, hold on.
No worries.
I think for me, if you're thinking of dropping out, I find that that's a point where you're probably not going to come back from it. And I think that if you'd be doing a disservice to yourself to carry on, but what I would 100% do is start working as if you have dropped out. I think you don't want to waste any time, and the most difficult thing you're going to have doing is not just, I think, because you can forget your parents being on board with it. They might do, but you've got to, go worst case scenario that they don't want you to. And the only way that they're going to be on board is when they start seeing results. And I think that something I've learned is that, money definitely does talk, and that's the only real, that's only going to be the only real indicator to your parents or people that you care about that this was the right thing to do. So, I'd start focusing on it as if you already have dropped out. And you can really hit the ground running once you do, and then proving people wrong will just be a much quicker, easier process from there.
I love that. Yeah, totally agree. And on the flip side, what parting advice do you have for any of our listeners who have already dropped out and who are already on their entrepreneurial journey?
I think for now, I think almost not going against, but considering what I just said, I think once you've dropped out, you can't worry for a second about trying to prove people wrong. That's only going to happen, through getting your head down. And I think the second that you start being concerned that, you're not living that flashy lifestyle on Instagram, and you're also not posting your graduation pics like everyone else is. You got to leave that behind now. Like it's you and it's up to you from there. And it's a very exciting time as well. I think enjoy it is the main thing. And talk to other people that are in the same place as you. I think people can get a bit isolate themselves slightly and think that I'm a hustler now. I can't go out at the weekends, but I find that really unhealthy, and I think that people need to understand that what's integral to a lot of success is ensuring that they're connecting with the right people, and you never know who you're going to meet through that.
Yeah, love it, man. What's the best way for people to connect with you?
So I think for me, anyone can email me if they want to talk directly. It's just Cathal@socialchain.com. Cathal is how you spell that, at socialchain.com. Or follow me on Twitter, I think is the easiest way as well to kind of keep up with me. And that's just at Cathal UK, so Cathal UK. I'll spell that out for you. A little easier.
Awesome. Well, Successful Dropouts, you've been hanging out with Cathal and Kylan, learning what it takes to drop out, grind, and succeed. For everything we've talked about today, head over to successfuldropout.com and type CATHAL into the search bar, and the show notes will pop right up. And as always, stay hungry, stay foolish. For more information about how to drop out, grind, and succeed, go to successfuldropout.com. I also love questions. If you have a question about anything we talked about today, I want to hear from you. Go to successfuldropout.com and click the Ask Me a Question link at the top of the page. Successful Dropouts, if you could go to iTunes and leave a positive rating and review, it would help this show out a lot. I know you're busy, I know you got a lot going on, but if you do that, it helps this podcast rank, it helps other people listen to it and gain value just like you have been. Thank you so much in advance.